Parliament, and here it is on my website, chances are that it's not a real petition. That is to say, it's not something that they're going to submit to Parliament in your name. Chances are it's just one of those ways of collecting data so that, Pierre knows a year from now or 2 years from now that he's got a list of people who are against the so-called Great Reset that he can write to and maybe fundraise off of. I know I'm very cynical, but look, that's the way it is. I'm not going to try to put a spin on it here or yank people's chains. That's what these petitions are used for politically.
Yeah, it's why part of the reason why I don't think they work. Secondly, because they carry no weight. It's like somebody who's on Twitter or Facebook or some other social platform slinging mud. I mean, yeah, okay, you put your name and your address down, but you're just one line in amongst thousands. There's safety in numbers, so you can sign that and not have to worry about the consequences. Whereas when you have a public protest, first of all, you'll never get a million-man protest in Canada unless they put an end to the healthcare system. Like if they stop socialized medicine, then you'd see 1 million people in the streets. But other than that, you're never going to get anybody. You can't get 10 Canadians to agree on what the weather is like at any given moment in their part of the country, never mind whether or not the government should be doing anything about topic A, B, or C. We just don't have that in our psyche. We're too diverse a population. We're too large demographically. Or demographically, no, but I mean geographically.
Sure.
Like if you go to Belarus or if you go to, let's say, London or if you go to France, these are big places, but the concentration of people in their major centers is massive. Like what's London got? 15 million people?
I don't know, but it's significant. It's
one of the world's great cities.
More than Killaloo, Ontario.
Yeah. Any place is more than Killaloo. But the point is that even if Canada did manage to field 1 million people, how long are they going to stay? You're right. It has to be sustained pressure. It has to be not just a flash in the pan. And we used to talk about this as truck drivers. Oh, let's block the border so we can get better pay. Well, let's block the border for this. And they wouldn't do it. First of all, it's against their own personal best interest, because if you're not moving, you're not making any money. And it applies the same to a protest. If you go out on a week-long protest, that's a week's income you've lost.
Right.
So people have to weigh that and say, how am I going to make up for that? Because not everybody can take a week off at the drop of a hat.
Right.
So it's very difficult to mount any kind of numbers when it comes to putting on a protest with any kind of teeth. And all we're left with are the professional protesters who get paid to go and protest, and they're the ones who burn things down. They're the ones who try to cause as much chaos as they can, through different strategies that they employ to make it look like it's a bigger deal than it is. And the government will pay attention to that because police cars are burning, their windows are being broken, even if it's so small a number of people, this is statistically insignificant as far as the population as a whole is concerned. So this is why protests, by and large, and I'm including in the protest petitions, they don't work. So the question then becomes, what does? I mean, yes, you can vote over every 4 or 5 years, but you've got to get people to hang on to their memories long enough to remember what happened in year 1 and year 2 and into year 3. It's not all about just the last year, because that's when they traditionally smarten up and try to, or at least they behave better and you throw the population a few bones so they forget about all the garbage that went on in the first part of their mandate. And they will go, well, they gave me this, they gave me that, and they vote for them anyway, forgetting all about the reasons they were ready to throw them out in year 1.
Well, let me just point out, Nick, that if there was a protest that would work, I think that would be very effective. In North America, it would be truckers shutting down the cross-border traffic because there aren't a whole lot of roads crossing the border. You'd think that there'd be many, but there really aren't that are readily available to a large number of transport trucks. So, you take a day, 2 days, 3 days, and you block those border crossings, and you will get government action. And unlike last year, for instance, when you had protesters blocking railroads, that had the same effect in terms of delaying traffic and delaying the transfer of goods from one part of the country to the other. Still, when you have one protester or a handful of protesters blocking the railroad tracks, it's pretty easy to react to that. And ultimately, when the government decided to act and send in the police to take down those protests and barricades, they were able to do it pretty effectively, pretty quickly. But, man, you get a couple of hundred trucks blocking the border at Windsor and Detroit, or blocking the border at Lansdowne off of Highway 401 between Cornwall and Toronto, or Cornwall and Kingston. You're going to get some pretty. It won't take long. I mean, the police can't just clear those trucks away. Number one, and number two, you're stopping pretty vital traffic. So, I'm not advocating for a protest for any reason here. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that that's really a far more effective way of doing it. And that's the thing is, the whole reason that you do these protests is more than just manifestation of my displeasure. It's that I want to cause a certain degree of pain in order to provoke a reaction on the part of my government. But look, you touched on, I think, a very interesting point, Nick, with respect to people being upset with their government, but then voting them back in 3 or 4 years later. And I don't think it's just that people are upset with the Liberals and then vote them back in or whatever. I don't think it's a particular government. I think what you're seeing is a phenomenon overall where people have just become, the government has become so big, it's become so ubiquitous, so in your face all the time. And politics has become that way as well, because government is that way as well, that in a very real way you become desensitized to it. And you may be unhappy about it, but human beings are incredible at adaptation, and they just get used to the worst situations. And as long as the shock isn't so great, as long as the encroachment is gradual, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting people to get up in arms and go out in the streets and really, I don't want to say manifest themselves or protest, but that's kind of where I'm going with it. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Now, to deal with the different methods of protest, your idea about blocking the borders with trucks, there's a couple of things. First of all, from a logistical point of view, you're going to have to pay those truckers. So you better start fundraising to put into the kitty so to give these guys at least subsistence pay in order to last 3 or 4 days. Because when your truck payment's $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 a month, you can't afford to sit still. So there's that. The other thing is you'd have to block Gananoque, you'd have to block the Rainbow Bridge, you'd have to block the bridge at Sarnia, you'd have to block the tunnel and the bridge in Windsor, and you'd have to block the one at Buffalo. So there's about 5 bridges you have to block. Well, you'd only have to do it in Ontario, because that's where the vast majority of trade crosses the border anyway.
Well, the good thing here is I'm not planning to do it.
I'm just saying. But to make that effective, that's the kind of thing you'd have to do.
Well, I just wanted to get out there and say we're not planning this, just in case the RCMP or the NSA of the States are listening in on our conversation here, Nick.
Yeah.
I don't need a knock on the door at midnight or at 2 a.m.
I'm not planning any protest either.
Yeah, we're not. Okay, don't everybody chill out, okay? All right, relax. There's nobody's. We're not planning on doing
academic exercise.
That's it. This is
That's
just
right.
nice. Be zen. Right. That's all we want.
But
be zen.
The bottom line is that in order to make real change, it really does come down to the only weapon we have, metaphorically speaking, to affect change only comes along once every 4 years. And I don't know how it's going to happen, but somehow the Canadian population, well, Western populations, let's broaden it out. It's not just a problem in Canada, but it's a problem all across the Western world, have to be shaken to their core and recognize the threats that face them from the people they once elected. And as long as, if you look at Trudeau's reset, we can talk about that for a minute. What does he really want?
Well, let's put that off to the next segment, Nick.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize what time it was. Sure. But we can talk about, there has to be a way to defeat these kind of ideas. And the best way, there's only two ways that come to mind. One is the ballot box, and the other one is the courts. The courts are hugely expensive, although one could argue that the wrong result of the ballot box is even more expensive. Look at Canada's debt, for an example. And, you mentioned something during our pre-show meeting about Canada's debt level and how we're going to get into this a little bit later, but how Trudeau thinks that if the government takes it on, that means Canadians don't have to. The debt, I mean. It makes me blow my mind. Are people really that gullible to believe that? Anyway,
it's the frog. It's the frog in the pot.
Yeah.
It's the frog.
I ain't no frog, and I don't like staying in a pot. And it's the other thing. I think there's a certain amount of narcissism built into the Canadian psyche. It's almost like, you remember the Red Green Show.
I never saw it.
What was the Possum Lodge pledge? I'm a man, but I can change if I have to, I guess. That's almost the national pledge. We're Canadians. We can change if we have to, we guess. And we used to have a spine of steel, and now it's jelly. Because anytime the government lifts its finger and shakes it at us, we go running for cover and screaming, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. Like Trudeau canceling Christmas? Are you kidding? Trudeau telling the churches what they can do for how they celebrate their religious services?
But the irony,
are we nuts?
Yeah, but the irony, Nick, is that it's actually not Trudeau that's doing that. It's the premiers, most of whom happen to be conservative, at least conservative in name.
Well, let's call it the state then, in Jen, so we throw the net as widely.
That's fine. I know you hate it when I defend Justin Trudeau, and I'm not trying to defend him, but I'm just saying that, look, give credit where it's due, and and dish out the blame where it's earned. It's not our federal government under this Prime Minister has been, in my view, on certain topics, nothing short of disastrous. But at the same time, we've got these pandering dandies in the conservative ranks and in conservative leadership positions across this country, and they're just not willing to take some of these subjects on squarely, which is too bad, because then what ends up happening, and we've talked about this many times before, Nick, is that you end up with a population that doesn't see a clear choice. They don't realize that there's a choice to be made here, and so they just go along with what they know. And Nick, with that, Nick, we're going to have to go for a break. But ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to the show live, do not go away. We've got some doozy topics coming up over the next hour and a half. And if you're listening to the podcast, make sure that you tune in to the part 2 of this week's episode, part 3 and 4 also, because you don't want to miss some of these subjects. So we'll be back in a few minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show on ThinkRadio.ca.